There is a lighthouse in Scotland that no longer exists. No ruins, no records, no coordinates, just whispers. They say it stood on a cliff no map can find, and sang to the sea, not with light, but with a melody so haunting. Sailors would throw themselves into the waves just to follow it. Entire ships vanished, children disappeared, and those who returned could never remember why they left in the first place. Some say the lighthouse was built on the grave of a woman who waited too long for the man who never came back. Others say it wasn't built at all, but remembered into being. This is the story of the lighthouse that called sailors to their deaths, and of the one woman who dared to answer its call. Stay with me, because once you hear the song, you'll never forget it. The radio came alive at 2:13 a.m. A soft crackle, followed by a screech like gulls tearing through fog. Then a voice, barely human, so trembling. She's singing again, we couldn't turn back. And then silence. The rescue station officer stared at the receiver. He tapped it, called out, repeated the channel. No reply. Only the low hum of the tide creeping back toward the cliffs of Ardglass. The next morning, the Coast Guard found only the wreckage, planks bobbing gently in a tide that should have been calm. No bodies, no flare, no distress beacon. The sea had taken everything. Again. 3 ships in 3 weeks. The people of Ardglass had stopped looking toward the horizon. They knew what lived beyond it. Isla McCrae arrived under a sky of iron. The train left her on the edge of the world, or so it seemed. Ardglass was more fog than village, more memory than map. Old stone cottages leaned into one another, as if whispering secrets passed down from long-forgotten tongues. Fishing nets hung dry and unused. Boats sat tethered in silence. And at the far edge of the bluff, where the cliffs breathed salt and sorrow, the silhouette of the Brainmore Lighthouse pierced the mist like the last needle in a torn sail. No light, no keeper, no visitors. It had stood empty since 1902, or so they claimed. Isla dragged her suitcase down the cobbled path, each step echoing louder than it should. She was a marine investigator with the Northern Maritime Authority, 28 years old, raised by the sea, logical, practical, unshakable, and yet, something about Ardglass pressed against her bones in ways logic could not quiet. She stopped at the inn. The keeper, an elderly woman with faded eyes, greeted her with polite silence. She handed over a rusted key and said only, "If ye hear anything strange at night, don't answer it." Isla forced a smile. "Like what?" The woman didn't blink. "You'll know." That night, the fog thickened. It wasn't the soft, drifting kind that curled over hills like breath. It moved like intention, folding around street lamps, pressing against windows, muffling every sound until even Isla's heartbeat felt distant. She sat by the window, journal open, recording the facts. 3 disappearances, 1 shared location, Brainmore Lighthouse. She stared at the tower's black silhouette. It hadn't been maintained in over a century, and yet its structure remained firm, clean, untouched by gulls, its windows unbroken. There was no reason it should still stand. No reason it hadn't crumbled into the sea like the cliffs that surrounded it. No reason. Unless someone was still tending to it. Isla frowned. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory stirred. Her mother's voice, low and worried. "Don't ever go near Brainmore. The sea there remembers things." The next day, Isla met with the harbor master. He was a gaunt man named Fergus, with skin like driftwood and eyes like broken glass. "I'm looking into the recent disappearances," she said, placing the files on his desk. Fergus barely glanced at them. "Then you're wasting your time." She leaned forward. 3 vessels, all experienced, all disappeared within sight of that lighthouse. Fergus tapped his pipe against the table. "Sight of it, yes, but never near it." "What do you mean?" He exhaled. "That lighthouse, you never get close. You think you're steering toward it, and then you're not. Your compass spins. Your instruments fail. The fog thickens. You lose time. And if you're lucky, You come back with nothing but a headache and a hole in your memory. And if you're not lucky, he stared at her, you never come back at all. Isla's second night in Ardglass was worse. The wind howled, but the trees didn't move. The tide came in, but the waves didn't make a sound. She dreamed of a melody, a song so distant it sounded like the stars weeping. When she awoke, her window was open. She was certain she'd locked it. The next morning, her boots were soaked, her feet blistered, and there was sand in her bed, fine, gray, salt-crusted. She hadn't gone outside. At least, she didn't think she had. By day 3, Isla was obsessed. She walked the cliffs, mapping the area around Brainmore. She spoke with villagers. Most wouldn't say a word. One, a child no older than 10, whispered to her when no one was looking. She sings to us sometimes, the girl said. Isla knelt. Who does? The child pointed to the lighthouse. She misses her husband. Who told you that? The child tilted her head. The tide did. That night, Isla sat on the cliff's edge. The lighthouse was closer than it had been. She was sure of it. Stood straighter, prouder, like it was listening. The fog rolled in, heavy and fast. And then she heard it. Voice. No, not a voice. Soft, aching, endless. It was like memory-given melody. Like longing you could hum. It wound through her chest like thread through a needle, pulling something from deep inside her. Something she didn't know she'd buried. She rose to her feet. The world blurred. She didn't remember walking. Didn't remember the path. Only the song. The sea welcomed her with open arms. She woke up at dawn, soaked to the skin. Her clothes clung like seaweed. Her hair matted with salt. Her hands trembling. She sat alone on the shore, barefoot. Ahead of her, carved into the wet sand, was a perfect spiral. No footprints, no drag marks, just the spiral, large and deliberate, its center pointing toward the cliffs and the lighthouse. The melody still rang faintly in her ears, but her voice was gone. Isla stood staggered. How had she gotten here? Had she sleepwalked? Had she been lured? Her feet hurt. Her throat ached. Her mind was hazy. But her instinct, the same one that had kept her safe on wild seas and dangerous shores, screamed one word: leave. And yet, she walked toward the spiral. The village was still asleep, cloaked in that dreadful hush. Only the lighthouse watched her. Only the sea breathed beside her. And somewhere far below the crashing tide, a voice whispered through the deep, "She's singing again." The village of Ardglass had long buried its ghosts, some beneath stone, some beneath sea, and a few in paper. After her haunting encounter on the beach, Isla McCrae didn't sleep. Not truly. Rest was something she used to understand, a quiet shelter for the mind. But now her dreams were filled with water, her skin itched with salt, and always, that melody returned, humming just beneath the wind, like an old wound whispering to be opened. She didn't tell anyone what had happened. What would she say? That she walked into the sea and awoke beside a perfect spiral carved in wet sand, as if the ocean had signed a letter meant only for her. That the lighthouse sang in her dreams. That she'd begun hearing things, even when she was awake. Instead, she followed the oldest instinct she had. Seek the records. Look for the story hidden beneath the official one. Because there's always a hidden version of history, especially in places where people avoid eye contact. And in Ardglass, all roads led to 1902. The local archives sat like a forgotten limb behind the parish church, its stone walls cracked and its windows wearing the dust of decades. Inside, time moved differently. The air smelled of damp parchment and old seaweed, of ink that had dried before Isla's mother had taken her first breath. She asked for reports relating to Brainmore Lighthouse, specifically anything from the year 1902. The woman behind the counter, a gray-haired keeper of silence named Morag, hesitated. "Why that year?" she asked, fingers pausing above the ledger. "3 vessels vanished this month," Isla said. "Same pattern. And Brainmore's the common thread." Morag nodded slowly. 1902 was the year the sea stopped giving anything back. She returned with a single file. Unlabeled. Mysterious, in that bureaucratic way that makes you wonder what was removed. Inside were 3 names. Angus Dalrymple. Tumisheen. Reverend Edwin Coyle. 3 lighthouse keepers. 3 men. Each posted to Brainmore Point in the summer of that year. And each had gone by October. The official report was thin. A weather log. Supply receipts. A single photograph showing the 3 men standing stiffly in front of the lighthouse. Distant, black-eyed, wind-battered. But the back of the photo was smeared with something. Wax? No, salt. A crust of it, like the sea had tried to claim even the paper. Isla flipped to the last page. There was a single entry dated October 16, 1902. It read, "Storm last night. No response from the tower this morning. No light. No signal. Found door open. No signs of struggle. Logs incomplete. Personal effects still inside. All 3 keepers presumed drowned, but no bodies recovered. Final log found beneath Edwin's bunk. Pages water damaged. Words barely legible. Final entry reads, 'She's here. She's singing to us now.' That was it. That was the last known record of the 3 men who vanished into the breath of the lighthouse. But something about that line stopped Isla cold. It wasn't just a cryptic phrase. It was a confession, and it wasn't filed under maritime record. It had been stapled haphazardly, like someone didn't want it found at all. She asked Morag, who had submitted the report. Morag squinted at the barely visible stamp. Coast Guard Division. Signed by A.W. McCrae. Isla froze. Her grandfather, Walter McCrae, had died before Isla was born. Her mother rarely spoke of him. Only once had she mentioned that he'd served on the Scottish coast in the late 40s, stationed near Brainmore Point, but never went near the lighthouse. That had been the phrase. Never went near it. But the report proved otherwise. He'd not only known of the 1902 disappearances, he'd hidden parts of the record. She needed answers. And old houses hold more than dust. That night, Isla drove to the family cottage by the cliffs, a narrow, weather-worn structure that creaked with every breath of wind. She hadn't been there since her mother's funeral, and the air still smelled faintly of candle wax and brine, like the sea had seeped into the walls and refused to leave. She searched the attic, boxes of photos, nautical charts, old journals, and at the bottom, wrapped in waxed cloth, she found a thick leather-bound book. The cover bore no title, only a spiral burned faintly into the hide. Inside, the missing pages. The diary of Reverend Edwin Coyle, one of the vanished keepers. The entries began normal enough. June 10, 1902. Weather mild. Lighthouse clean. Angus sings in the evenings. Tommy drinks too much but keeps the lantern trimmed. July 2nd. Heard strange noise last night. Sounded like singing far off. Tommy says it's the wind, but Angus hasn't sung since. August 5th. Angus won't sleep. Keeps muttering in Gaelic. Says she's walking the stairs. I've locked my door. August 18th. Spirals. Freeware. Carved into the railing. Into the floor. Into his bunk. Tommy caught Angus scratching them into his own arms. We restrained him. September 3rd. The song is real. Changes depending on who hears it. Tommy says it sounds like his mother. To me, it's the hymn we sang at my sister's funeral. October 10th. The sea glows now. Blue light beneath the surface. Saw a woman's face in the waves. Is black. Lips smiling. She called me by name. Final entry. October 14th. She's here. She's singing to us now. And then the ink trails off, as if the pen was pulled from his hand mid-sentence. Isla closed the journal. Her breath trembled. She looked back at the cover, the spiral. Edwin had drawn it over and over again. 300 times in the margins. 300 repetitions. A symbol of descent, of obsession. She remembered what Fergus had said. That people tried to sail to Brainmore but couldn't. that compasses spun and time slipped. But Edwin hadn't tried to flee. He'd stayed. He listened. And something inside that tower, something ancient, something mournful, had sung them out of this world. As she flipped through the final pages, another item fell from between them. Photograph. Faded, folded at the corners. The ink almost gone, but unmistakable. It was her grandfather, Walter McCrae, standing inside the Brainmore Lighthouse. The background was unmistakable. The brass spiral of the stairwell, the rusted window bolts, the carved initials from decades of keepers. And beside him, another figure, woman. But her face was too blurred to make out. And yet, her silhouette, it felt wrong. Not monstrous, not grotesque, just out of time. Her dress flowed strangely. Her arms were bare, her posture regal and frozen. And something in her presence made Isla's stomach turn cold. The date on the back was written in shaky hand. 1947. Her grandfather had entered the lighthouse. He had seen her, and he had never spoken of it. Isla clutched the photo. Her world was no longer facts and maps. This was a wound buried in salt, a song echoing across bloodlines. She had followed the melody unknowingly, but her family had been tethered to it all along. And now she couldn't help but wonder, had her grandfather heard the song too? Had he resisted it? Or had he sung back? Outside, the sea called again, not with words, not with waves, but with that same ancient tune, low and tragic, the way grief might sound if it had lungs. The same melody from her dreams, the same that haunted every missing man since 1902, the same that had no beginning and no end. Isla stepped out onto the porch of the cottage, holding the diary in one hand and the photo in the other. Fog curled around her like the fingers of the past reaching forward. And on the horizon, faint, flickering, the Brainmore Lighthouse glowed. For the first time in over a century, it glowed. Some nights don't end when the sun rises. They linger, thick, unspoken, unfinished. The kind of nights that bleed into the bones of morning. It was 3:13 a.m. when Isla pressed record. The wind had changed again. Not in speed, not in direction, but in tone. It moved through hourglass like a voice trying to speak through centuries of silence. She sat near the window of her own room, the same one where the walls moaned during high tide and the floorboards groaned without footfall. Her small recorder hummed with life. Outside, the lighthouse pulsed faintly in the fog. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it, like a presence watching her across a great distance, just beyond reason, just beneath understanding. She left the recorder running and drifted into a kind of half-sleep. Not rest, not dream. A waking state laced with fragments of memory and sound. At dawn, she played the audio back. It began with wind, then the whispers, layered, breathy, countless. Not voices raised in panic, but something worse, surrender. Let go, let go, let go. Over and over. And then silence. Except just before the final second, something new. Name. Whispered so softly it might have been imagined. Isla. By first light, she was already at the docks. The sky above Ardglass was bruised purple. The sea, for once, was not roaring. It was too still, glass-like, suspicious, as if it had paused its breath to listen. She took a small boat, an old wooden one with a hull that creaked as if it remembered every tide it had ever touched. The engine sputtered once, then caught. The harbor was deserted. No one dared go near Brainmore anymore. Even the fishermen refused to cast their nets in that direction. But Isla, she couldn't turn back. Not after the diary. Not after the recording. Not after the photo of her grandfather, smiling faintly inside a tower no one was meant to survive. As the boat cut through the still water, the fog closed in again. Not thick, but dense with something older than weather. The compass spun, its needle dancing madly. Her GPS flatlined. Her phone showed no signal, no time, no date. She had entered the lighthouse's shadow, and nothing modern worked here. Then the wind stopped entirely, and the lighthouse appeared. Brainmore Point stood like a monolith, its base chiseled from ancient rock, its crown lost in mist. The tower didn't look abandoned. It looked patient, like it had been waiting. The boat bobbed against a narrow ledge carved into the rock, where seaweed clung like withered fingers. She tied the rope, heart pounding. The stones beneath her feet were warmer than expected. She stepped carefully, boots crunching over shells and barnacles. The base of the lighthouse, thick with moss worn by centuries of salt and time, bore strange markings. Not letters, symbols, spirals, yes, but also runes, ancient ones, carved into the foundation stone like a prayer or a curse. She knelt down, brushed away the grit, and saw them, half buried beneath sea crust and rusted iron. Thick ancient chains bolted into the rock, some still coiled in place. Some snapped, as though something once tied there had torn itself free. And beside the chains, bones. Human, weathered, stained green with salt. Ribs, vertebrae, finger bones. A skull, split neatly, as if someone had removed the voice before the breath. She couldn't breathe. What was this place? Behind her, footsteps echoed. But when she turned, no one. Only the sound of water lapping gently at the rock. And yet, the whisper returned. Not a warning this time. Memory. Let go. Isla's eyes traced the markings on the foundation. This was no ordinary lighthouse. She had studied enough coastal architecture to know the difference between a beacon and a tomb. She ran her fingers along the carvings. They weren't modern. They weren't even medieval. They were prehistoric. Then a shadow moved, and a voice broke the silence. You shouldn't be here. Isla turned sharply. A fisherman stood a few paces behind her, wrapped in oilskin, boots soaked, eyes hollow. She hadn't heard his approach. Who are you? Name's Callum. My grandfather used to fish these waters. Told me stories when I was a boy. About this place. About what's buried beneath it. Buried? Callum nodded. They built the lighthouse on top of a cairn. Not just stone. Tomb. Said it was the resting place of a Selkie priestess. Isla's breath caught. Selkies, shapeshifters of the sea. Women who could shed their sealskin and become human. But priestesses. She hadn't heard that version before. They say, Callum continued, she was betrayed by the man she loved. Gave up the sea to be with him. And when he left her for land and power, she stood at the edge of the cliffs and sang until the sea rose to claim her. And the cairn. They buried her in chains, thinking it would silence her. But grief doesn't die. It waits. Why build a lighthouse on top? Callum shrugged. Or maybe it built itself. Some places don't follow the rules of men. They remember. They call back what was taken. He turned to leave, pausing once. When the wind speaks, don't answer it. And then he vanished into the fog. Isla stood alone. The tide was rising. She crouched once more, brushing back the moss, exposing the rusted hook embedded in the stone. Part of the chain that once bound the Selkie priestess. She reached out, touched it, and the world shattered. Not in sight, not in sound, but in memory. Her knees buckled, her vision blurred. The sea roared all around her and then went silent. And in that silence came a voice she hadn't heard in years. Her mother, the Antle, singing the lullaby Isla had clung to as a child. A song about the sea, about longing, about waiting for someone to return. Let go, Isla, her mother whispered, through the rust, through the stone, through death itself. Come home. Isla stumbled back, gasping. The hook steamed beneath her hand. The air grew cold. And for a moment, just a moment, the waves glowed blue like something was moving beneath them. Not light, not fish, but memory given form. She stared at her reflection in the water and saw her mother's eyes looking back. The lighthouse loomed behind her, silent but watching. A monument of mourning. A tower of forgotten love and remembered betrayal. Isla stepped back onto the boat. Her compass was still spinning. But now, she no longer cared about finding direction. Something deeper had awoken. Not just in the lighthouse, not just in the sea, but in her blood. Her grandfather had known. Her mother had warned her. But it wasn't enough. She had to know everything. The lighthouse wasn't just calling. It was remembering, and she was already part of its song. When the people of Ardglass awoke that morning, the village had changed. No storm had passed. No wind had blown. The sea was quiet, too quiet, and yet the signs were everywhere. Hundreds of them. Every dock post, every wooden rail, every boat hull marked. Spirals. Countless spirals. Carved crudely, deeply, as though by hand or claw during the night. Some small as coins, others the size of dinner plates, all facing the same direction, all circling inward. They weren't vandalism. They were messages, not written in words, but in repetition, in obsession. By midday, the fishermen refused to untie their boats. The priest nailed his chapel doors shut. A boy was caught red-handed scratching a spiral into the side of his school desk, muttering words no one could understand. And Isla McCrae. She hadn't even left her room. She was still staring at her hands, because she'd woken to find ink beneath her fingernails. Black, sticky, faint traces of circles drawn across her own skin. She hadn't sleepwalked. She hadn't moved from the bed. But something in her had. The dreams had started the night before. She remembered it clearly now, in fragments, like someone else's life bleeding into her own. The sky was purple. The sea glowed beneath the cliffs. She stood in the lighthouse at the very top, barefoot on cold stone. And opposite her stood a woman in a red cloak. The woman's back was to her. Long dark hair matted by fog. Her hands clutched the iron rail. She was weeping, but her face was dry. Instead, a song escaped her throat. Whoa, melancholic, impossible, because her lips didn't move. The song poured from her without sound, without effort, like the air itself had become her voice. Isla tried to speak, but her own mouth wouldn't obey. The spiral beneath their feet began to glow faintly. The woman turned, and though her face was obscured, her eyes were Isla's. Then she woke, drenched in sweat, her pillow damp with seawater. By noon, the village was different. Not louder, not frightened, quieter, too quiet. The pub was closed, the chairs still upturned from the night before. The owner, a man named Reggie, known for his booming voice and love of whiskey, hadn't been seen since evening. His front door was wide open. The fire had burned itself out, and his boots were still beside the hearth. Only a spiral had been carved into his floor, right in front of the fireplace. The villagers noticed, but no one said anything. No one wanted to remember what happened between midnight and 3 a.m., because that's when the time slips began. Isla questioned the child again, the same girl who had once whispered that the tide told her stories. The girl had drawn hundreds of spirals in her notebook, filling every page, not with images of ponies or clouds, but with the Brainmore Lighthouse, again and again, from different angles, each more detailed than the last, even the inside, rooms she'd never seen. She couldn't explain how she knew what the staircases looked like. She simply said, "It sings to me when I'm dreaming." Isla asked her what the song said. The girl answered without blinking, "Come home." By nightfall, the fog returned, not drifting but crawling, clinging to rooftops, filling lungs. Isla walked the village streets and felt it again, the pull, that familiar ache beneath her ribs, the strange weight in her chest that no logic could name. She passed people who looked half awake. A woman standing in the rain, staring at the sea. A man clutching a spiral pendant that hadn't been there yesterday. A dog howling toward the lighthouse, even though nothing could be seen through the fog. The curse wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was patient. That evening, Isla returned to the lighthouse. She didn't tell anyone. She rowed alone, the water again too calm, her hands again trembling. This time, there were no glowing blue lights, no spectral whispers, only silence, until she stepped onto the ledge and saw something new. Name carved into the stone. At the base of the lighthouse, near the old rusted hook where the chains lay. Her name had been etched by an unfamiliar hand, perfectly, delicately, and beneath it, 1846. She blinked, bent closer, touched the grooves. 1846. She had been born in 1994. The date was 150 years before her time. The seaside below her, cold and endless. She looked up, and for the first time, she saw the red-cloaked woman again, standing at the top of the lighthouse, just as in the dream, weeping without tears, singing without breath. She stumbled backward. This wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't memory. It wasn't madness. The lighthouse, it was choosing people. It was selecting them. Not all heard the call. Not all could see the spirals. But the ones who did, they had something in common. A piece of them already belonged to the sea. She rushed back to the village, searched through old records, family archives, parish books. 1846. She found it. A stillbirth. A girl named Isla McCrae. Born and died the same day. No middle name. No baptism. Just one line. Mother Maura McCrae. Father unknown. Cause stillborn at sea. Buried with stone. No grave. No marker. But the name was there. Isla. She wasn't the first. She was the echo. That night she dreamed again. But this time she wasn't watching. She was the woman in red. She stood atop the lighthouse, hands bloody, chains clinking behind her, the wind roaring. Men shouted below, torches in hand. Witch! Monster! Selkie! Temptress! She tried to speak, but her voice had been taken. Her skin burned. Her bones ached. Her child gone. She looked to the sea. Answered. The song came not from her lips, but from her grief. The wind carried it outward. And then the spiral beneath her began to glow. And she let go. When Isla awoke, the spiral was burned into her wooden floor. No fire, no flame, just a perfect blackened shape. She was shaking, crying. And in the distance, the lighthouse pulsed once. A heartbeat of light through endless fog. The curse wasn't ancient. It was alive. The sea never gives back what it takes. But sometimes, just sometimes, it forgets to hold on. And when it forgets, secrets rise. It was a storm that unearthed the chart. Not a violent one. Just enough wind to shift the ocean's breath and stir the bones of old wrecks. A local diver named Ewan was searching for lost copper from a 19th century shipwreck when he found it, wedged in the rusted ribs of a broken hull, sealed in a waterproof case older than any he'd ever handled. It wasn't treasure. No gold, no silver, just parchment, single delicate chart. And on that parchment, 3 lighthouses, all labeled the same name, Brainmore, all in different places. Ewan brought it to Isla. He didn't trust the harbor master. He didn't trust the village priest. But Isla, the one who spoke to fog like it had answers, she'd know. She took one look and felt her breath fail her. There, in faint black ink, were 3 coastlines. The first dated 1846, the second 1902, third 1994, the year Isla was born. 3 different coastlines, 3 different locations, same tower, same spiral symbol, same hand-drawn script across each. Brainmore Light. The lighthouse had moved. Isla locked herself in the back room of the archive. A room no one entered anymore, filled with dust-thick records and maps crumbling at the edges. She laid the sailor's chart beside the official Coast Guard maps from each era. The proof was unmistakable. In 1846, Brainmore stood near Dunbriest Rock, miles north of where it sits now. In 1902, it had shifted south, perched precariously above what is now called the Widow's Bay. And in 1994, it was barely visible near the shoreline of Ardglass General Hospital. Long closed now, its windows boarded, its gardens overgrown. The tower hadn't been rebuilt. It hadn't been replicated. Had simply moved, quietly, patiently, like a predator changing hunting ground. Or like memory, always there even if no longer seen. She revisited the hospital. The place had been shuttered for years. The iron gate hung open, clanging in the wind like a bell with no ringer. She wandered through halls now painted with mold and silence. Birds nested in broken ceiling tiles. Vines crawled down abandoned corridors. And then, room 217. Her mother's final room. The door was ajar. The sheets on the bed, still there, stained and stiff. The four-pole leaned like a weeping tree. Isla stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath her, as if whispering her name. She stood still. Let the silence come. And then she remembered her mother's final words. The last thing she'd said, eyes glassy, voice almost gone. Don't follow the song. At the time, Isla thought it was nonsense, delusion. But now she understood. Her mother hadn't died of illness. She'd been called, and she had tried, with the last of her strength, to warn her daughter away from the same fate. Isla returned to the archive and searched for the oldest records, not just of the lighthouse, but of what had come before. In a sealed drawer, beneath centuries of taxes and births and deaths, she found it. A scrap of vellum, half-burned, barely legible, a fragment of a Gaelic myth. It spoke of Cailleach na Mara, the sea widow, not a goddess, not a monster, woman. A woman who had once lived by the cliffs, married to a sailor. Her heart, her home, her soul, all tethered to one man. He had gone to sea on a day the winds warned against. He had not returned. She waited for a week, then a month, then a season. Then, maddened by grief, she walked to the cairn, the sacred burial mound of her ancestors, and sang a song of such pain, such beauty, such power, that the sea itself listened. It did not return her husband. Instead, it took her, and it made her eternal. Every 100 years, the myth said, she returns, not to destroy, but to remember. She builds her beacon in silence. No stone is ever lifted, simply appears. And those who share her pain, those who have lost something the sea never gave back, they hear her song. They walk toward it. They vanish. Isla remembered the dreams. The woman in red. The weeping without tears. The voice without lips. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a curse. It was a grief made immortal. And now Isla understood something deeper, something darker. She hadn't just been hearing the song. She had been singing it. The next day, she visited the diver again. Ewan. She asked about the wreck, the one where he found the chart. He said it hadn't been listed on any shipping log. No name on the hull. No records in the archives. Then how do you know it's from the 1800s? He looked at her strangely. Because of what else I found. He handed her a locket, water-worn, rusted shut. Isla pried it open. Inside, a faded sketch of a woman. No eyes, no mouth, just faint lines. And a spiral drawn where her heart should be. And tucked behind the portrait, a music sheet. 1 line, 5 notes. The same 5 Isla had been humming since childhood. Her lullaby. She staggered backward. This was in the wreck. Ewan nodded. I thought it was nothing. Old sailor's trinket. Isla stared at the notes. 5 tones. Whoa. Haunting. She sang them aloud slowly. The room went cold. Ewan dropped his coffee. The mug shattered. The sea outside the window rippled. Though there was no wind, Isla stood frozen. The melody she had believed was her mother's, a lullaby whispered in sleep, had not come from her family. It had come from the widow. It had passed through bloodlines, through generations, through dream and memory. And now it had returned to her. That night, she opened the sailor's chart again. 3 lighthouses, 3 eras, 3 spirals, 1 melody. She laid the pages out across the floor and followed the spiral from oldest to newest, 1846 to 1902 to 1994, and realized it wasn't random. It was movement, clockwise. It was drawing something. Path, not across space but time. A spiral of memory. A curse written not in words, but in longing. She traced her finger along the ink and felt the chill of water creeping up her spine. The Brainmore Lighthouse was not a place. It was an echo of sorrow so powerful that it took form. Solid, visible, tragic. And it moved to wherever someone waited too long for someone who would never return. Isla returned to the hospital one last time. She sat in room 217. She listened, and in the distance, too far to be real, too close to be ignored, she heard the 5 notes. The lullaby, the widow's song, the sea calling not in violence, but in love. Twisted love, grief disguised as comfort. She whispered into the silence, "I hear you now." And for the first time the wind outside replied, not with words, but with breath, warm, then come. Isla had heard many sounds in her life. The crash of waves against rock, the creak of wood in deep water, the hush of fog rolling in before dawn. But nothing stayed with her like the song. That melody, haunting, gentle, impossible, clung to her skin, whispered through her hair, burrowed behind her eyes like a secret refusing silence. She needed to understand it. Not emotionally, scientifically. So she brought the recording to someone who didn't believe in ghosts. His name was Callan, a sound engineer from Edinburgh, more comfortable with frequencies than folklore. He wore noise-canceling headphones even in silence, hated poetry, and said things like, "Everything is code." When she handed him the file, he scoffed. Probably wind distortion or underwater resonance. But when he pressed play, he stopped speaking. The waveform on his monitor didn't behave like any natural sound. No bass rise, no wind signature, no consistent wavelength. Instead, it pulsed, delicately, intentionally. He ran the waveform through several filters. Each revealed a new layer. Harmonics that shouldn't exist, frequencies that drifted out of the human range. And back in. Didn't just play. Move. "It's not static," Callan murmured. "It adapts. Look here, it's reacting to our ambient sound. It's responding to me, adjusting the volume." Sla leaned closer. "What does that mean?" He looked at her. For the first time, his skepticism had thinned. "It means your recording is alive." He ran it through a spectrogram next. What they saw made Isla's blood run cold. The waveform formed spirals. Dozens of them. Fractal spirals. Golden ratio patterns. Endlessly recursive. Mathematically perfect. "It's not a song," Callan whispered. "It's an algorithm. A pattern designed to loop and deepen the longer it plays. It's self-replicating." She stared at the screen. "Like a virus." He shook his head. "Like hypnosis, written in sound." The more they analyzed, the stranger it became. Most music is built around rhythm, repetition, tension, release. But this melody followed no rules. Instead, it triggered irrational spikes in brainwave patterns. Induced micro-emotional tremors. When he ran it through a neuroresponse model, the results looked less like music and more like emotional programming. "It's designed to bypass logic," Callan said. "It doesn't want you to hear it. It wants you to feel it. Why would someone create that?" He looked at her for a long time. What if it wasn't created? That night, Isla couldn't sleep. The melody, even when muted, played on in her mind. Each time she tried to hum it, it came out slightly different, like it was changing based on her memory. Like it was waiting for her to get it right. She dug through her belongings until she found her old childhood cassette, the one her mother used to play to help her fall asleep. A lullaby she'd always believed was a Gaelic folk tune passed down through her family. She played it. Same 5 notes, same intervals, same spirals. She ran it through Callan's software. Identical pattern. It had always been there, hiding in plain sight. Not haunting her, training her. The next day, Callan brought news. He had run the sound through a reverse-engineered vocalizer. A tool meant to simulate how it would sound in human voice. And something emerged in the underlayer. Voice. Will. Not lyrics, just emotion. Dream. Longing. The sound of someone remembering something they could never touch again. He isolated the lowest frequency, slowed it, then played it backwards, and a voice spoke, clear, Familiar. Come home, Isla. Come home to me. She froze. Her eyes filled. Because she knew that voice. Even after all these years, even through time and grief and distance, she would never forget it. Her father. Gone to sea when she was only 8. Lost in a storm. No wreckage recovered. No remains. Just an empty casket and a promise unkept. She had never heard him again. Till now. She played the clip on repeat. Her father's voice. Calling her from within the sound. Was it real? A hallucination? Projection? Or had the song absorbed memory? The grief of every soul it had touched, and made it part of itself? Callan didn't know. He only said one thing. This isn't music, Isla. This is memory architecture. It's building on what you've lost. It's stitching itself into your grief. That's why it works. That's why you can't let go. Later that night, alone, Isla began to remember things that had never happened. She stood in rooms she'd never entered, saw faces she didn't recognize but felt she'd loved, walked the lighthouse stairs barefoot, not in dreams, but in memory. Vivid, aching memory. Each step held her mother's scent. Each spiral echoed her father's laughter. She began to forget which memories were hers, and which belonged to the widow. She returned to the chart from the wreck, traced the spiral paths again. It wasn't geography, it was signal transmission. The lighthouse didn't just move across land, moved across minds. Each generation it returned, not for revenge, not for death, but to connect, to remind, to build a structure of grief so vast it became a place. A lighthouse of sorrow, anchored by sound, floating between reality and memory. She turned the recording back on. The 5 notes. Again. Slower. Softer. Come home, Isla. She realized then that the song was never about destruction. It was about pulling people back into the sea, not physically but emotionally, spiritually, across the thin line between now and never. It was an invitation, a longing so pure it became location. The lighthouse was not built. It was felt into being. And she had been inside it her whole life. But now she knew. And knowing changed the melody. Where once it felt like drowning, now it felt like remembering. Some disappearances are mourned with sirens and searchlights. Others vanish into whispers. Ardglass had whispered about its children for decades. 5 names, 5 faces, 5 little ghosts that never grew old in memory. They were always the same age in the stories, always just beyond reach. Not all in the same year, but all lost near Brainmore Point. Isla didn't believe it at first. Children wander. The sea is cruel. Myths are convenient when truth is too painful to bear. But myths don't lie the way people do. And there was something wrong in the air. She could feel it now. In her dreams, in the hollow between her ribs, in the way the song kept threading itself through her thoughts. A melody that tasted like childhood, but didn't belong to her. Not entirely. She found the woman by accident. Mrs. Rowena Muir, sharp-eyed, slow-moving. The kind of woman who had outlived everyone who dared contradict her. She lived in a slate-roofed cottage at the edge of the village, where the sea spray carved the windows into cloudy panes and birds avoided the eaves. Isla had come to ask about records, birth logs, school reports. Instead, Rowena handed her a box. "No use in digging through paper," she said. "You're already in it." Isla frowned. "In what?" Rowena didn't answer. She just opened the box. Inside, a black and white photograph. Faded, warped by moisture and time. 5 children, standing in front of the lighthouse, all staring toward the camera except one. A little girl with braids, turned just slightly, face half hidden by shadow. Her hand held the hand of another child. A girl with dark hair and wide, uncertain eyes. Isla's eyes. Her breath caught. "This isn't possible." Rowena nodded slowly. "I told you. You're already in it. I don't remember this. I've never. You were 6. Summer of 2000. I saw you near the cliffs with my sister's granddaughter. Thought it odd. You weren't from the village, but you kept humming. Over and over. Same tune every day. Isla's voice was barely a whisper. "What happened? I called out to you. You looked at me like you didn't hear. But your friend, Orla," she turned and smiled. Rowena's mouth trembled. "She never came back." Isla stared at the photograph again. The lighthouse in the background didn't look quite the same. The spiral markings hadn't yet overtaken the stone. The light housing was broken, its glass shattered like a wound. But the shape, the presence, it was unmistakable. It had been calling children, and one of them had been her. She had no memory of it, not even a flicker. She asked Rowena if there were others. The old woman nodded. 5 by the village's count. The first was a boy in the 70s. Then 2 siblings in 83, a girl named Orla in 2000, and one just 5 years ago, the baker's niece, playing with chalk near the pier. Her last drawing was a spiral. And the parents. Rowena's gaze darkened. Each one heard the song before their child disappeared. Isla's blood ran cold. It wasn't random. It was inheritance. She left the cottage with the photograph clutched tightly in her coat. Fog began to roll in again, earlier than usual, heavy as wool. The air smelled like driftwood and memory. She walked along the cliffs toward the beach. The wind hummed the melody low and deep. And again, for just a moment, she felt herself younger, smaller, as though her legs moved without her will. Flashes came, sand between her fingers, a voice, not her own, singing behind her, then gone. As if someone had pulled a curtain across the memory. She reached the cove where the tide left secrets behind. The sun was just beginning to sink, the water turning silver, the stones beneath her feet damp and glistening. She sat down, closed her eyes. Listen, no song this time, just breath, you see. But then, beneath her hand, something solid. She brushed away the sand. Weathered, hand-carved. Humble, worn smooth by time. No face, just a small spiral drawn in fading red paint on the chest, and carved into its back, beneath the seam. I am. Her initials. She held it like it might vanish. She had no memory of it. But her name was carved in its back, the way a child claims what they love most. A gift, a talisman, or something left behind. Had she been chosen only to somehow escape? Had the lighthouse let her go? Or had someone taken her place? She looked out at the sea, the fog thickening. She remembered Orla's smile in the photo. The children weren't just called, they were offered. One generation heard the melody, the next answered it. Not all were taken, but the ones who heard the song young, they carried it forever. In dreams, in lullabies, in grief. Isla returned to her room and locked the door. She sat on the floor with the photo and the doll, placed them side by side. The girl beside her in the image, Orla, had no grave, only a name written in church records. She checked the back of the photo again. Date, time, August 3rd, 2000, between noon and 3. And beneath it, faint, another set of initials. W.M. Walter McCrae. Her grandfather. He had taken the photo. He had brought her there. The realization sank like iron through her chest. He had heard the song too. He had entered the lighthouse once, and he had returned with it inside him. And on a summer afternoon, he had led her to the water. But someone had stopped the song from finishing its work. She had returned, but Orla had not. There were names that didn't survive on paper, only in whispers. Isla now knew she had been close to becoming one. She had left something behind, the doll. And now it had returned to her. She turned it over once more. A seam at the base. Inside, something tucked into a slit. She pulled it free. Note, folded tiny. Written in pencil, in the hand of a child. One word. Run. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in her bed, the doll beside her, the melody behind her eyes. She wasn't just a descendant. She was a survivor. And the song wasn't finished with her yet. Time began to bend in art glass. Not visibly, Not all at once, but subtly, like tide pulling at the edges of a sandcastle until its shape becomes something else. First, it was just odd moments. People waking an hour later than they swore they should have. Blank stretches between meals. A fisherman finding himself at sea with no memory of casting off. Children appearing on doorsteps that weren't their own, clutching seashells and humming lullabies. Then entire nights vanished. 3 villagers couldn't remember going to bed, but woke damp and barefoot, with kelp tangled around their legs. An elderly widow swore she'd spoken to her dead husband near the harbor, though he'd been gone for 20 years. The priest, Father Cullen, forgot his own sermon mid-sentence and simply wept in the pulpit. And still, no one dared speak aloud what they knew. That the lighthouse pulsed brighter each night, and the sea was remembering. For Isla, sleep became something else entirely. No dreams, just visions, lifelike, terrible. She stood at the edge of a burning ship, smoke choking the sky, fog rising like curtains drawn by unseen hands. The name on the hull had been scratched out, replaced by a spiral etched in fire. Sailors screamed, but not in panic. Some. Their voices echoed in harmony with the melody that haunted Isla's life. Those same 5 notes, but now drawn out complex, like the original song had only ever been a fragment, and this was its full form. One by one, the sailors jumped, not flailing but smiling, as if something in the water promised them peace, as if it called them home. Their bodies vanished beneath the surface without a splash, and Isla just watched, frozen, until a woman stepped beside her, cloaked in red, face turned toward the sea, and said softly, "You were there too." She woke gasping. Salt burned in her throat. There was sand in her bed, and on the inside of her wrist, a spiral drawn in ink. Not fresh, but not there the day before. She sought answers in the old church records, in pages that smelled of mildew and stormwater, and in a forgotten ledger from the 18th century, tucked behind marriage announcements and livestock taxes. She found it. 1759. A ship called the Delilah, bound from Portugal to the northern ports, crashed upon the rocks of Brainmore Point. 39 men aboard. For survivors, all found naked and singing. None spoke again. Not once. Not even when the villagers tried to feed them, bathe them, question them. They just stood, hands at their sides, heads tilted slightly to the left, humming, each starved within a month. And in each of their final moments, they smiled. The journal entry from the local minister was barely legible, scrawled in a shaking hand. They do not fear, they wait. And when the moon rose full, they all looked to the lighthouse as if expecting a mother's hand. But the lighthouse was not built then. Not yet. Isla ran her fingers over the ink. The song hadn't started in her time. It had simply reached her, like a ripple finally touching the edge of the shore after centuries at sea. She returned to the sailor's chart, the one recovered from the wreck. It was beginning to yellow at the corners. The spirals drawn upon it grew darker, more defined. Or perhaps her eyes were seeing more now. She noticed something she hadn't before. Each date of the lighthouse's recorded location shift lined up with the lunar cycle. Not just any moon. The harvest moon, full, closest to the earth, brightest, and the next one rose tomorrow night. That evening, she went down to the docks. The pub was empty again, windows shuttered, no lanterns lit. A hush settled over the town like a held breath. Even the gulls were gone. She stood on the beach, eyes on the horizon. Then she saw the boy, no older than 10, standing ankle-deep in the surf, staring into the fog as if it were telling him a bedtime story. Isla ran to him, knelt. "Where's your family?" He didn't look at her, just kept humming. The 5 notes. She shook him. He blinked once, then turned and whispered, "She says you're almost ready." "Who?" Isla's voice cracked. He pointed to the water. "To your mother." That night, she tore apart her room looking for anything, any trace of where this was leading. In the floorboards, beneath the loose plank she hadn't noticed before, she found a slip of paper, folded once, no envelope, yellowed, cracked at the corners. It bore her handwriting, her exact hand. But it wasn't a note she remembered writing. The date at the top was tomorrow. And the message was simple. I must enter the lighthouse alone. Isla stared at it until the candle burned out. The sea whispered behind the walls. The song hummed from inside the earth. And she knew now that this wasn't just about the past. It was a tide, not of water but of memory, pulling her forward, one step at a time. The lighthouse waited for her, as if it had been built for this moment, for her steps, her breath, her arrival. No lock barred the door. No storm guarded the cliffs. The wind had calmed, and the sea too stood still, as if holding its final breath. Isla stood at the threshold. She clutched the letter she had found the night before, the one written in her own hand, dated today, telling her she must go inside. She didn't remember writing it, but she understood why she would. Somewhere in this tower was the end of the melody, the answer to a grief older than her name. She stepped through. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the quiet of an empty room. Something deeper, like the air was made of memory. Dense, unmoving, as if sound didn't belong here anymore. Her boots echoed faintly on the stone. The spiral staircase wound upward, narrowing with each rotation, swallowed in shadow. She touched the wall, warm, breathing. She began to climb. Time fractured with the first step. Each stair felt longer than the last. 1 second stretched like candle wax in heat. A minute, a year, or less. She couldn't tell. Her heart kept pace with something above her, a pulse that didn't match her own, but beat steadily, like a drum beneath the floorboards of a dream. The light at the top, faint, golden, pulsing, grew no closer, only deeper. Each turn revealed the same spiral, the same rusted railing, the same chipped steps. Again and again, a loop inside stone. She stopped, turned back. The stairs below her were gone. Only fog, only light. Then came the voices, not around her, inside her. She turned another corner, and there stood a man in keeper's garb, gray beard, eyes. He stared straight through her and whispered, "She wept for 100 years. You won't change that." He dissolved into mist. Further up, another figure, a boy in sailor's clothes, no older than 13. He sang the melody, slow and hollow. His lips cracked, blood on his cheeks. "She promised we'd see our mothers again," he said. "But we forgot their faces first." And he too vanished. She passed them one by one. A woman with kelp tangled in her hair. Child holding a doll. A man with no tongue still humming. They were echoes, memories, warnings, or perhaps rehearsals. She began to tremble. Then she saw herself. Not a mirror, not a trick. Herself standing 3 steps above. Older, or younger. Dressed in clothes she didn't own. Hands bleeding. Eyes wide. "I tried to stop it," the other Isla whispered. "I walked the spiral backward. It only made it stronger." She reached out. Her hand passed through. Only mist, only memory, only the sound of the song growing louder, closer, inside. She didn't know how long she climbed. An hour, a lifetime. Time bent with every step. But finally the spiral ended, and the staircase spilled into a room of impossible geometry. It shouldn't have existed. Not in the space she'd entered. Not in the world she knew. A circular chamber. Mirror-lined walls. 12 of them. Tall, old, silvered. No doors. No ceiling. And in the center, a single lantern glowing gold. Not electric, not flame, just light. Pulsing like a heartbeat. She stepped forward, and her reflection moved with her. Then it smiled. But Isla didn't. The reflection kept smiling, kept moving slightly ahead of her. She raised her hand. The reflection raised both. She stepped left. The reflection stepped right. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. Her reflection did, and sang. The 5 notes. Clear, Perfect. Isla tried again to speak, screamed even, but her throat held only silence. Her reflection laughed and sang louder. Then the mirrors flickered, and each one showed her in a different moment. A baby wrapped in sea-soaked cloth, a child staring at the cliffs, a teenager bleeding from her palms, spirals etched into her skin, a woman walking the lighthouse stairs endlessly. 12 versions, 12 fragments, 12 echoes of a life rewritten by sound, and all of them singing, except her. She was voiceless, alone. Then the chamber darkened. The lantern pulsed once, then again, and a voice, low, not from outside, but from within the mirrors, boomed across the room. Only one of you may leave. The reflections smiled wider and began to walk forward. Isla backed away. Her real breath fogged the glass behind her. But the others, the echoes, left no mist. She was the only one breathing, and the only one who didn't remember who she had been before the song. She turned, looked at her own face, at all her faces, and then back at the center, at the lantern, and realized this wasn't a room. It was a test, a decision. Only one version of her would walk away, the one who sang, or the one who still remembered silence. She stepped toward the lantern. The singing rose behind her. The light grew warmer, brighter. Each reflection leaned in, and her own stepped forward, not smiling, not weeping, just watching. Then the light flared, and the mirrors cracked, and the song stopped, but one voice remained, hers, speaking for the first time in what felt like years. I remember now. And the chamber vanished. There was no door. When the mirrors cracked and the room dissolved, Isla expected to fall or wake or vanish. Instead, she stood still, at the summit of the lighthouse, though no stair had taken her there. No glass enclosed the space. No railing kept the edge. The wind howled in silence, and the sea below shimmered as if waiting to rise. Before her stood the sea widow. She was not cloaked in mist or crowned in coral. No monstrous shape or shadow. Just a woman. Slender, ill, aimless. Her hair fell in long strands like kelp caught in tide. Her eyes were oceans themselves. Not blue, not green, but the color of distance. Her gown billowed in no wind. Her skin shimmered faintly, not with light, but with memory. She watched Isla without malice, and she wept without tears. Isla knew her instantly, not as an enemy, but as something deeper, a grief made flesh. You made the song, Isla whispered. The widow shook her head gently. No, I am the song. The words floated through the air like smoke, half voice, half melody. I waited, she said. Once, a long time ago. Isla stepped closer, the lantern glow behind her pulsing slower now. For him. The widow didn't answer. Instead, she raised a hand, and suddenly the sky was gone, replaced by waves, by a ship, by a memory. Not Isla's, the widow's. She stood on a rocky shore in the long-ago past, barefoot, holding a bundle wrapped in sealskin. A man boarded a ship, promising to return before the next moon. He never did. No wreckage was found. No storm had come. Only silence. And in that silence she sang, not for rescue, but for remembrance. The melody came not from her lips, but from her longing. It called into the sea, into the world, into the very stones beneath her feet. And something somewhere heard it, and it never stopped listening. Back in the tower, Isla breathed slowly. You didn't mean to curse the world. The widow's gaze flickered. I only meant to call him home. The tower around them pulsed once. A low hum ran up Isla's spine. The spiral beneath her feet glowed faintly, like an old bruise surfacing through skin. Why the children? The widow closed her eyes. They are echoes, she said, left behind by those who left me. They come back through blood, through time, through dream. I do not take them. Then who does? The widow looked at her. They follow what their mothers sing to them in the dark. Isla's knees weakened. She remembered the lullaby, her mother's voice. Soothing. I never questioned it. No one does, the widow said. The song doesn't take. It remembers. Then the sea below began to rise. Not violently, not crashing, but lifting like a deep tide drawn upward by sorrow. And the widow turned to the light. The lantern in the center of the tower now glowed steadily. She's almost full, the widow whispered. The moon. No, the memory. And then Isla saw them. Figures in the mist outside the tower, walking across the waves. Dozens, hundreds. Some carried lanterns. Some held hands. Some sang without mouths. Each glided forward, as if sleepwalking across a dream-made ocean. And at the front, her mother. And behind her, her grandfather. And beyond them, the child version of Isla herself, barefoot, holding a wooden doll, looking up at the tower with silent, searching eyes. Isla trembled. You called them. The widow shook her head. They called themselves. They were grieving, Isla whispered. They wanted to remember, the widow replied. But memory is a door, and doors, once opened, ask to be walked through. Isla stepped toward her. Why show me this? The widow tilted her head. Because you are the first to return. You didn't finish the song, she continued. You resisted. I was too young. No, you were too needed. Isla frowned. I don't understand. The widow extended her hand, and suddenly the spiral beneath them widened, revealing not ocean, not stone, but lives. Isla's lineage, each generation, all tethered by loss. She saw her great-grandmother at sea, weeping into a mirror. She saw her grandfather, standing outside the lighthouse with the photo of a little girl. She saw her mother, whispering lullabies in a hospital room with fog tapping at the glass. Each one touched by the call, each one answering it. Till now. You are the end of their line, the widow said. The last who can choose. To do what? To stay. The tower pulsed again. The sea rose higher. The figures outside grew closer. The spiral must break, she said. Not by denial, but by presence. Not by forgetting, but by remaining. Someone must stay willingly. Isla's voice was soft. And never leave. Not with longing. Not with regret. Not to seek or sing or call. Just to be. The widow stepped back. And the tower began to hum. Faster. Louder. The mirrors below cracked. The spiral burned. The sea lapped at the base of the lighthouse, hissing like breath. Then came the final twist. The widow touched Isla's shoulder. And in that instant memory bloomed. Unbearable. Beautiful. The first time she heard the song. 6 years old, standing barefoot at the water's edge. The hand that held hers, Orla's. The smile that followed. And then the moment Orla let go. And Isla stayed behind. But the memory didn't stop there. It reached further. The night Isla's mother died, she wasn't alone. She chose to sing one last time. Not out of grief, but out of love. To spare her daughter. To pass the burden. Isla had been called her entire life. And now she had arrived. The sea poured into the tower. The floor quaked. The mirrors shattered. The light trembled in its cage. And the widow asked softly, "Will you sing for me?" She opened her mouth and sang. The melody, simple yet infinite, poured from her like a river that had waited its whole life to break free. 5 notes, that was all. But the sea, which had risen like a beast around the lighthouse, suddenly bowed in silence. The storm paused mid-roar. The mirrors ceased to shiver. The spiral beneath her no longer burned. It glowed softly like the final embers of something sacred. And for a moment, the grief in the tower held its breath. Isla stood in the center of it all. Her voice the only sound in the world. But with each note, she began to forget. First, it was just her surroundings. The coldness of the stone under her feet. The lantern that had once guided her from below. Now nothing more than light without a source. Then names slipped away. The sound engineer. The fisherman. The boy on the beach. She kept singing, and her name followed them. Not all at once, just the edges. Letter here, syllable there. Soon it became a question. Who am I? But the melody demanded nothing but surrender, and she gave it. Her memories folded like paper in the rain. The years, the loss, her mother's voice. Their shape still remained, but distant now, like stones beneath the tide. She couldn't hold them, only drift with them. But she wasn't lost. Not exactly. She was becoming something else. The widow had told her the lighthouse needed someone to stay. Not to guard it, not to suffer within it, but to become it. Not out of punishment, but remembrance. Now Isla understood. She was no longer Isla. She was the spiral. She was the melody. She was the tower. And the tower remembered. She could see through the walls now. Not like sight, like feeling. Like sensing the ache of every soul the lighthouse had ever called. She saw the ships, ancient, modern, sailboats and fishing vessels, trawlers and navy craft, all gliding across black water. Each carried passengers haunted by loss. A father who whispered to the waves each night. A mother who slept with her child's photograph sewn into her coat. A widow who read letters that never arrived. The sea did not hunt them. It recognized them. And the lighthouse, her now, welcomed them. Not to die, but to remember. The spiral didn't kill. Kept hold of those the world had forgotten. It wrapped them in lullaby and memory and grief until they became part of something larger. An eternal chorus, sung in longing and sea salt and silence. And as she stood at the top of the tower, voice fading into golden mist, Isla understood why no one ever returned. It wasn't because they couldn't. It was because they no longer needed to. But then something shifted. The light for the first time dimmed. A presence entered the base of the tower. Familiar. Someone was climbing the stairs. Not an echo. Not a reflection. Someone alive. She felt them, felt the shape of their thoughts, the rhythm of their breath. And then she saw her. Little girl, 8 or 9. Wrapped in a red raincoat. Boots damp with sea spray. Eyes wide. Eyes that matched Isla's. Exactly. The child stopped halfway up the spiral. Looked around as if listening for something. And then softly, so softly, began to hum the song. Snowed perfect. Each pause instinctual. She wasn't learning the melody. She already knew it. And Isla remembered. In part 7 there had been a photo. 5 children. One of them her. The others, us. But the girl before her now wasn't a stranger. She was something much harder to name. Possibility. A reflection. Continuation. She watched the child climb higher, step by step, drawn to the light without fear. And something inside Isla began to fracture again. But not from forgetting. From feeling. For the first time since she entered the tower, she felt pain. Longing. A name rose in her mind like a wave breaking. Orla. The girl who had let go of Isla's hand all those years ago. The one who vanished. But this girl could still be saved. She chose it. Isla chose it. The light trembled. The sea stirred. The tower began to hum once more. Not in welcome, but in warning. If the girl entered the spiral's heart, she would never leave. She would sing like all the others. She would forget. She would become. And Isla would no longer be the last. The pattern would continue. The song would echo. The grief would persist. Unless someone broke it. Unless someone said no. She stepped forward, closer to the spiral's edge. To the final turning where the girl would arrive. She reached for her voice. It was faint now. Fragile as wind on water. But still there. She shaped it into one word. Stop. The girl froze. Looked up. Eyes wide. Curious. Who are you? She whispered. And Isla could not answer. Not with a name. Not anymore. She only said, I was like you. The girl took one more step. And Isla felt the sea rise again. Within herself this time. Memories flooded back. Clashing against the shores of who she'd become. Her mother's smile. Her grandfather's photograph. The old doll buried in sand. The song as it had once been. A lullaby, not a summons. And she remembered something even deeper. Why she had come. Not to join the song, but to end it. She looked at the girl. And she knew what had to be done. She could stay. She could carry the sorrow alone. She could remember so that no one else had to. And the girl could forget, could live, could grow old. The spiral pulsed around her. The walls opened, showing the sea beyond. The voices of the drowned rose in chorus. And the choice pressed down like weight. Tupat. One silence. One song. The girl stepped into the light. And Isla reached out. To give her everything. To send her back. To break the spiral. The light did not fade. It burst. Wordless. Endless. The tower pulsed once, like a final breath, and then shattered into radiance. No fire. No scream. Just light, blooming out from the top of Brainmore Point like a second sun rising in silence. And then, nothing. When the villagers ran to the cliffs that night, the lighthouse was gone. Not crumbled. Not broken. As if it had never existed. Only the mist remained, swirling above the sea, soft as ash, refusing to speak of what it had seen. In the weeks that followed, Ardglass changed. The fog lifted for the first time in a generation. No more spirals appeared on the docks. No songs drifted from the tides. The air felt lighter, like someone had wept for 1,000 years and at last finished. No one spoke of Isla. Some didn't remember her at all. A few whispered that she had been real, that she'd come asking questions no one should ask. But those who knew, those who felt, said only this. She ended the song. Years passed. The cliffs grew wild with grass. Children played near the shore again. Fishermen returned to old routes. And the lighthouse, once a looming presence, faded into myth, then into memory, then into silence. But stories have a way of clinging to the blood, especially those that never truly ended. And the melody, those 5 soft notes, remained, not in the sea, but in a girl. Her name was Orla McCrae. She had her aunt's eyes. She lived inland, far from Ardglass, in a quiet cottage with too many books and a mother who loved too deeply. She was a quiet child, curious, strange in the way that dreamers often are. At night, she hummed herself to sleep, not lullabies taught by family, but a melody no one remembered teaching her. 5 notes, low, low, familiar. Her mother never questioned it, only watched, and wept sometimes without knowing why. On Orla's 12th birthday, a package arrived, wrapped in brown paper, tied with rough twine. No return address, no sender. Inside, a seashell, pale pink, ridged like an ear, and carved into the center. Delicate, exact, unmistakable. Spiral. Orla held it to her ear. Listen. No crashing waves. No wind. Just one sound. A single word. Whispered like a secret the sea had kept too long. Remember. That night she dreamed of cliffs. Fog. Of a tower that didn't cast shadows. Only music. Of a woman, tall, silent, sad, standing at the edge of the world, smiling. She wore red. She sang without lips. And when Orla opened her eyes the next morning, she remembered the dream not as fantasy, but as home. In Ardglass, a fisherman mending nets at dusk paused as the tide rolled in. Once a year, like clockwork, he sat at the edge of the water on the night of the full harvest moon. He didn't know why. Only that something called him, not in voice, not in fear, but in stillness. And that night he heard it again, a voice in the distance, not singing, just watching, just being. And he wept without understanding. The lighthouse never returned, not to the cliffs, not to the charts. No map showed it now. No boat found its remains. But sometimes, in the lull between dusk and dawn, when the sea forgets time, a faint light flickers above the water. And if you listen closely, if the wind dies just right, you might hear it. Not a warning, not a curse, just a melody, gentle, longing, remembering. The screen fades, the fog rolls in, and just before the last light vanishes, Voice, distant. She's still singing. And so the lighthouse is gone, washed from the cliffs, wiped from the maps, remembered only in lullabies and dreams. But its echo lingers, not in stone, but in those who listen, those who've lost something to the sea, those who feel the pull of places they've never seen, of stories that feel older than the bones in their bodies. Perhaps it's not truly gone. Perhaps some lights were never meant to guide ships, but memories. And maybe, just maybe, you've heard its call too. If this tale stirred something in you, a chill, a question, a memory you can't quite place, then the sea has done its work. There are more stories like this one. Forgotten legends, cursed places, lost cities waiting beneath centuries of silence. And if you're drawn to the mysterious, the tragic, the hauntingly beautiful, then stay close. Subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who still believes there are places the world has tried to forget. Comment below if you've ever felt the presence of something ancient, just beyond the fog. 'Cause here we don't just tell stories. We remember what was never meant to be lost.